Welcome back to the KAHI Afternoon News. Good afternoon. I am Casey Freelove. Pleased to be joined by Congressman Tom McClintock for our weekly conversation. Tom, let's start with an update. I mean, you're out there in Washington. What has the day been like as the Trump impeachment hearings get underway? What's been your experience, and what have you seen so far this afternoon?
Well, I'm on the Judiciary Committee, so that we don't get back into this until we're given a report.
Okay.
From the Schiff show, as they're calling it, that's going on right now on the Intelligence Committee. But from what I'm seeing, it seems to be unraveling out of the starting gate. There have been admissions from the principal Democratic witnesses that they've got no evidence of any linkage between aid and action, only presumptions that they made, largely from reading the New York Times. So I think they're going to have I think it's unraveling faster than the Mueller hearing.
You know, depending on what website you go to, the headlines are just stupid, in my opinion, you know, kind of trying to glamorize this and make it into something that it's not. And I mean, just being there, it feels to me it's going a lot worse for the Democrats than they probably would have hoped and intended in hyping this up and talking about all the coverage is going to be available and stuff. It's not going well to start.
Well, I mean, there are three facts that I think combined make this just look absolutely silly. The first is Joe Biden's son Hunter was indeed being paid lavishly by a Ukrainian oil and gas company called Burisma to sit on its board of directors, although he had no experience in either Ukrainian affairs or the oil and gas industry, and he took this office at the time that his father, the vice president, was directly involved in Ukrainian affairs of the United States. Nobody disputes that. The second is that Biden boasted publicly that he threatened to withhold aid to the Ukrainian government unless it fired their prosecutor general, Viktor Shokin, and no one disputes this. So the question is, why? And the third fact is that, according to Shokin, when he was fired at Biden's behest, he was, and this is a direct quote from him, making plans to question Hunter Biden about $3 million in fees that Biden and his partner, Archer, collected from Burisma through their American firm. He swore that out in court documents in Europe. So he swore that under oath. He has told reporters that he was actively involved in preparing to interrogate Hunter Biden over this corrupt arrangement when he was told he was fired at Joe Biden's behest, and Biden's admitted that. So you put all of those things together, and it certainly constitutes probable cause to believe that Biden might have used his power in a corrupt manner. That certainly justifies an investigation. And then finally, you have to ask, what was Trump's legal authority? Well, the Constitution vests all executive authority in the president, gives him the sole authority to conduct the nation's affairs with other countries, and it tells him to take care that the laws be faithfully executed. And if you go to the 2019 National Defense Authorization Act, which authorized the funding, it specifically says before the administration can release military funds to Ukraine, it has to certify that the government has taken steps against corruption and certainly corrupt dealings between American and Ukrainian officials falls within that mandate.
You've been in politics for a long time. You've seen a lot of time wasters and a lot of hype built around different issues, whether they were minor or major. I mean, it just feels, and I know I mentioned this last week, but the time being spent on this, it's just ridiculous.
Well, don't forget, I mean, we spent 2 years on bogus lies about Russian collusion and that Trump was a Russian agent, and it turns out that was totally false, and the government knew it was totally false at the time they first started making those charges 3 years ago. This so-called whistleblower, we're now learning, has direct ties to John Brennan and James Clapper, who were at the center of the Russian collusion hoax. The whole thing is starting to unravel, and the more we're learning, the more it is stinking to high heaven, including the fact that this so-called whistleblower concealed the fact that he was first in communication with Adam Schiff's office long before he filed this complaint. He concealed that on the official whistleblower complaint form, which as I understand it, that's a felony. That's filing a false statement because he's required to divulge that. And of course, Schiff lied about it on national television until it all came out. So A lot is starting to stink about this, and the good news is the truth will out. I think that within the next few months we're going to know a great deal more about all of this, and I think that the end result is going to be Donald Trump will still be president, and CNN is going to have a lot of vacancies among its commentators.
Yeah, and maybe some cheaper ad space available as well.
Don't want to mention names, but their initials are John Brennan and James Clapper.
And to that point, I mean, people following this closely, I hear a lot of people on the Democratic side talking about winning some races in this non-elect. The last Tuesday is what I'm referring to. But I think moving forward, when the American public kind of digests what's happening here, it has to be an advantage for the Republicans in an election year upcoming. I don't feel like you could really watch this and feel confident about what you're seeing from the other side, and you've got to make sure you go out and cast your vote. But it seems to me like it's going to play to the Republican advantage in the end of it.
Well, I think this is just the tip of the iceberg. Don't forget you still have the Horowitz report and the Durham report, both looking into the origins of this whole Russian collusion hoax. And how officials at the highest levels of our intelligence and justice agencies were using the most terrifying powers that we give our government to concoct this hoax that they knew was false at the time they concocted it, and then used it first to try to interfere in the 2016 election and then to undermine the president. And this so-called whistleblower, he's actually a provocateur, is directly connected to this coterie within the government. That feels they have been appointed by God to bring down this administration, when the Constitution makes it very clear that is not within their power.
We're visiting with Congressman Tom McClintock here on KAHI. This was just a blip somewhere on one of the websites, but I saw that Steny Hoyer said that the House is expected to pass a spending bill next week to fund the federal government through December 20th, just before a November 21st deadline, to prevent another government shutdown. And we've seen a lot of short-term spending bills, and of course everybody remembers last winter's shutdown over the holidays, which kind of dragged into January. Is that accurate? Are we going to see another short-term passage? And I've asked you this question in the past, but is there ever going to be a point where we can hammer out something long-term so people don't have to kind of walk on pins and needles worried about their government jobs?
Well, I've said all along that I think the principal problem with our being able to get a handle on spending is the fact that appropriations bills require a 2/3 vote, or actually 60 votes out of the Senate. That gives the minority party the ability to block any legislation. That's what happened during all the years that the Republicans controlled the Congress. And the problem is, you can't make any reforms under those circumstances. What happens is the House will make those reforms. Either on, the majority of the House will act and will send an appropriations bill reflecting the House's priorities to the Senate, but the Senate's gridlocked. It cannot act because of that rule. And the result is you approach a deadline, and you've got a Hobson's choice of shutting down the government or doing a temporary stopgap bill, and that's been the pattern. At some point, the Senate has got to change that rule so that appropriations bills may be acted upon by a majority of the Senate. Once that happens, then the Senate can act its will on these bills, and any differences can then be worked out in conference. But the problem is, under the current arrangement, appropriations bills stop dead in the Senate, nothing happens, and then you've got to do a stopgap funding measure because nothing has happened.
Would there be an advantage? I mean, is there a certain party that would be more inclined to want to do it, whether it's Republicans or Democrats controlling the Senate?
Whoever's in the minority doesn't want to do it because it gives them veto control over the process. The sad thing is, when the Republicans were in the majority, they could have streamlined that rule. We could have gotten progress, and the Senate Republicans chose not to do so. So at some point, that has been the Achilles heel of the process. We have a very good budget process in place, but it can't work as long as you have a partisan minority that is able to stop any appropriations bill that's sent over from the House. You've got to have the majority able to work its will, and as I said, are going to be differences between the House and the Senate, even when they're under the control of the same party.
Right.
That's the way it's supposed to be. And we have a conference process that has evolved over centuries. It's very good at working out the differences between the two houses, but it requires both houses to act. As long as that 60-vote rule is in place on the Senate side, the Senate cannot act. Therefore, the system seizes up, it gridlocks, and is reduced to sending out stopgap measures.
Well, a busy time in Washington. We've been visiting with Congressman Tom McClintock here on KAHI. Tom, as always, thank you for your time, and we'll look forward to visiting again soon.
My pleasure, Casey. Thanks for having me.
We'll take a quick break and be right back on KAHI Radio.